Okay, joining me now via Skype is Jason Zandberg. He is the cannabis analyst at PI Financial Corp. Jason, welcome back. Jason, so I've been asking everybody on the analyst front the same question, so I'm going to ask it of you as well. What are you seeing in the cannabis space that most excites you right now?
We're still paying a lot of attention to the U.S. space, and
I can hear him.
Can you not hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine now. Sorry.
Okay. We continue to like the U.S. space. We saw some data out of the Canadian rec stats in January that that show that Canada is really falling behind in terms of where we'd expected the first year of cannabis sales to be, whereas it's the opposite in a lot of the U.S. states. We're seeing numbers exceed where we were expecting. So we're focused very much on the U.S. multi-state operators, and zeroing in on states that we really like.
Sure. So what are your favorite states besides California?
Yeah, Florida is actually in a great position right now. Not only are we seeing sales doing really well in that state, but we're introducing smokable cannabis now, which wasn't allowed up until just recently. Edibles should be online here soon. So, and also we expect to see the patient count to grow quite rapidly. Florida, of all the medical-only states, Florida is number 2 right now, and it passed Arizona in the last 6 months, and we think it's one of the faster growing states for the medical programs.
Sure. So out of the country, out of the states right now, Jason, that aren't legal yet, some pretty big populations in like Texas is not legal yet, is it?
No.
And so what are the next big ones to go legal?
Is the big state of all.
Okay, so when do you think that'll happen?
I would expect in the, it's hard to gauge, but we're seeing this trend accelerate. So, I would probably say in the next 5 years. But that being said, now that we're starting to see the legislative process convert states into, either medical or recreational states, we're not having to wait every 2 years for special ballots. So, unfortunately, New Jersey didn't have their vote today, but we do see that the legislation process could rapidly expand the number of legal states, both on the medical and the recreational side. But in terms of Texas, I would say 2 to 5 years.
Wow. Okay, cool. What do you make, though? I've talked to every analyst about this that I've spoken to today too, so I'm trying to staying thematic and getting a nice cross-section of answers, which so far they're more or less the same. But we saw Peru go legal 2 weeks ago. Peru has, at this point, no operating companies, no licenses, 32 million people. How much of an opportunity is inherent in the international sort of scene as represented by recently licensed Peru, in your opinion?
Yeah, the international markets are definitely interesting. The upside is pretty significant, but it's how to get product to market. We haven't seen huge volumes for exporting cannabis to other medical markets. Germany should have been a fantastic country, which that's probably where the most exports are headed to. But even there, the numbers aren't exceeding our expectations, or even where we'd expect them to be at this point. So international markets are tricky to play. We would expect long-term most of the production would be within the country, so domestic production in whatever country goes legal, and that's that'll be up to how quickly licenses will be distributed in each one of the countries. So it's like I said, there's good upside on the international market, but there's not a clear path as to how North American companies get there.
Okay, so in your comment initially where you said that the Canadian large caps are disappointing because of their sort of shortfalls in reporting revenue as a result of Canadian legalization, and that driving your preference towards U.S. MSOs. Is that a temporary phenomenon in the Canadian sense because Canada's having the growing pains of this province-by-province distribution system? Or do you think it's more a reflection of the idea that 80% of the cannabis being bought by recreational users in Canada is still coming from unlicensed sources?
Yeah, no, there's definitely growing pains in the Canadian market. We do expect it to get back on track, at some point in the next few years. With October this year coming up with the introduction of edibles, that we'll see, again, growth in sales. And I think Canada will eventually get there. The one problem that I have with the Canadian market is, if you look at the government's approach to legalization, it appears as though they're more focused on controlling the market than expanding the market. In the U.S., it's the opposite. Most governments look at it as a tax base and they want to grow that cannabis market. So, in my opinion, I think the Canadian government would rather see a $6 billion black market turn into a $4 billion legal market as opposed to create a much bigger legal market, because we're everything that has been getting in the way of this market expanding in Canada has been really slow licensing. I mean, licensing has picked up over the last couple of years, but it's still, obviously, we've got a supply shortage, and they should have been licensing a lot faster, more rapidly, a year before the start of rec sales. And that's really hurting this market. So if the government can sort of get out of their way and allow this market to flourish, we could see some better upside for sales. But I really don't know if that's their intent long term. I think they're more focused on controlling the market than expanding it.
So we've got Canopy with a $20+ billion market cap, thanks to the participation of Constellation Brands. You've got Aphria in some state of negotiation still with Green Growth Brands. That could become something huge if you look at Green Growth's Peter Horvath's former association with brands like Victoria's Secret, etc. Aurora still is sitting out there as this, independent Canadian unicorn story in the cannabis space that doesn't yet have a partnership with a major globalized branded element. Is that something that could have a sector-wide positive catalytic influence on the Canadian market generally? Like when we saw Constellation put the $4.5 billion into Canopy, it lifted the whole sector by collectively 30% over the next 3 months. Is that something that we might expect to see happen should something materialize as a result of the participation of Nelson Peltz as advisor, who could probably bring something like that to the table for Aurora?
Anytime they're one of these transactions, it definitely is bullish for the entire sector. In terms of commenting about Aurora, you're right, they don't have a dance partner right now. It's likely that they have been in discussions with various third parties, and that's just because there's been a lot of companies that have been sniffing around the Canadian market for a number of years now. So, but yeah, it definitely would be a catalyst for the market. But in terms of timing or whether it will happen or not, it's hard to say at this point.
Sure. All right, that's great, Jason. I appreciate your participation as usual. I look forward to talking to you next. Thanks for joining me today.